Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I am Karen Matroni, and I'm the founder of Boots on the Ground. We are going to start. We don't have slides right now. You might have them on Zoom, but we don't have them here in the Eagle. That's okay. We're rolling with it. I want to start with our mission statement. Boots on the Ground was created to bring all members of the leather, fetish, and kink communities together to fight against the tyranny and oppression taking over the United States. We will fight so that we retain the inalienable rights given to us by the U.S. Constitution. We will educate ourselves to know how our democracy works. We will make calls, attend commission meetings, protest, march, create connection, and build community. Democracy will not die while we watch. We will fight and we will win. Now we're going to do the next slide, which is land acknowledgement. Do we have slides up? Okay, no problem. The land acknowledgement for today. Boots on the Ground recognizes that we reside on lands once inhabited and held sacred by the first peoples. For nearly 10,000 years, indigenous groups lived in South Florida. The Tequesta, Miccosukee, Seminole, Muskogee, and Taino peoples once lived in what we call Broward County. These distinct indigenous communities were among many others in South Florida considered ancestors of the present-day federally recognized Seminole Tribe of Florida and Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. Thank you. I have encouraged all to learn about the significance of the early inhabitants. With a collective knowledge of the past, we are inspired to teach, live, and support a future that empowers all individuals. Now, next slide, please. The Lace Up and Learn newsletter. If you are interested in learning about the news and do not want to read the 24/7 news cycle, I encourage you to sign up for the Lace Up and Learn newsletter. The QR code is on the screen, or you can go to botgfl.com and go to the newsletter tab, and you can sign up there. Next slide. All right, I would like to actually take a moment and thank some people that make this possible. First, thank you to my crew here, Will and Sylvie. Thank you for doing this, doing the Zoom while we do the class. I want to thank Mako, Infinity Angel, and Ray. They are all great doing the Zoom for us. And then Allie, thank you for all of your graphic help. And then Chuck and Greg of the Eagle. Greg's right here. And I want to thank them for giving us the space to meet and to have this space to educate. So now we're going to start with the class. I want to introduce you to our guest presenter today. His name is Big John, and when you see him, you'll know why that is. I met John years ago. We were at a leather event called Beyond Leather, and he was booping my cleavage. And it became our thing. And every year he'd boop, and yes, my cleavage. Every year he'd boop, and we'd talk, and that was that. Well, John and I were having a cigar smoke session, and we were talking about democracy and government, and the passion that this man has for our system of government, how our democracy was formed. I asked him right then and there to teach this class. Now, Big John identifies as a conservative, and I want you to pay attention, because the people you think that label themselves conservative are not always the people you're thinking. They're not all Trump supporters. And he's going to be talking a bit about what the conservative label means to a large majority of Americans. So don't worry about it anymore, Greg. Anyway, I would like to take this moment to thank Big John for putting this class together, having the passion to educate you on what this is about. And I'm going to give it over. Big John.
Okay. Let me get my laptop up here and keep the camera just a little bit there. Okay. Give me just a second. Okay. Always where to start these things. Hi, I'm Big John. Yes, nobody knows why they call me that, but there it is. A little bit on my on FetLife, I am just simply Big John. My email is bigjohn@evil.org. You can email me any questions you have during this. It's one of my favorite subjects. Like all the classes I teach, it comes out of several hundred hours of having conversations at miscellaneous places. And just, somebody goes, it should be a class. And there we go from there. So let's see. Going down the list here. The disclaimers. I am not a lawyer. I am not a politician, thank God. Everything I'm saying here, I try to be as unbiased as I can. There is a slight bias. There always is to everyone. Anyone who says there isn't, well, we know what they're doing. This is documented as I remember it. Don't take anything I say as the truth. It is a point for you to investigate. I can guide you during different directions, give you the magic words to go search for, but cross-check everything. That's kind of an opinion in life. I will have opinions. I will try and preface them with my opinion. Occasionally I will screw up, but they're usually pretty obvious. And I try to keep them to a minimum, but there are things which are considered that. As accessory reading to this and things like that, I have some books that are really good for this. I brought them here for the people. I'll have them added to the list when they post up. They're fairly light reading. Okay, one's a little thick, but it's things like People's Guide to the Constitution and things like that. And it reinforces a lot of what I'm going to say here with a lot more depth to it. And then, of course, just actually reading the documents itself. Yes, you have to grind through the Old English, but, you do what you have to do. Let's see. Okay. I was going to show a video here, but we have small technical problems. I would venture to say,
show it on Zoom.
Oh, we have it on Zoom. Okay.
We can have it on Zoom.
Okay.
So would you like to? And I'll try to play it here.
Yep.
We're live here.
I would say probably half of you in the country have seen this video, maybe more, but it is probably the best example of the lawmaking process I've ever seen in 3 minutes and much faster than I could ever do it. So it's kind of a fun, cute way of starting it.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, do, but it looks like I'm gonna live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be alone. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Okay, technical weirdnesses aside, and it's a funny way to start, but if you look there past all of the, made for kids on Saturday morning, all the bits and pieces are there, and it's a lot of stuff that people, even today, if you ask them questions about stuff, wouldn't be able to answer. Hence why we're doing some of this class. There's two directions in that everything in the government is somewhat circular, in that everything relies on something else. So talking about it, you have to kind of pick a point. So in going through the bill, to start with the basic construction of the government, which is, you do have the legislature, the Congress. Congress is made of the House and the Senate, all pretty straightforward stuff. The interesting part is that the founding fathers decided that the House should have a short history, that they should be the reactionary group, the people that are young and new to everything and to deal with the day-to-day problems. Whereas the Senate was supposed to be the old guard, 6-year terms, longer than a president, would have institutional knowledge and history, and would take a more far view of things. One thing not in the video is both the House and the Senate have different committees, sometimes overlapping, which again follows the same progress on a bill. It goes into a committee. The committee, if it survives committee, it goes to the full floor votes on it, and start again in another house, etc. What's not said in that video is an unfortunate truth is that lobbyists get involved. And what a lobbyist will do is go to a set of politicians and go, we want a bill for, a reason that they clearly state is completely biased, because they're lobbyists for pick your evil thing or good thing you like. They will actually write the bill because they have a whole bunch of people on staff and a bunch of lawyers, and they'll do all the wording and they'll hand it to a congressman and go, this is a really cool bill and we'd like you to sign it. And, I exercise for the reader to figure out why congressmen do what they say, but there's a lot of good indications. The end result is that they will bring it to committee. They'll bring a few friends, hopefully, probably with the same lobbyists in their ear, and then it will get to the floor. So by the time actual people hear about a bill, it's been through a few rounds of this. And that's kind of the first, acknowledgement that when you see a bill that's actually come up, it's been through a couple rounds of some special interest groups and things like that. And the only defense you really have against it is contacting your congressman. Little known detail, congressmen are effectively required to answer everything sent to them as a comment. Now, you may get a boilerplate or anything else, but even in the most, avalanche of communication, they'll get a head count. 10,000 people said they like this, 10,000 people they said. Some poor unpaid staffer did that. But it will make an effect because they are fighting for their job. At the end result, unfortunately, to go by old definitions, the idea was a politician is a professional political person, whereas a statesman was a person there that was a civil servant to serve the government. I would argue that as an opinion, we have more politicians than we have statesmen these days. So you've got a bunch of people trying to save their jobs. So at the end of the day, the only thing you can do to get your way is to threaten their job. And that's where things like how they're elected become important. Senate is pretty straightforward. It's 2 per state. You've got to get a state to actually agree on something, which is a little tough. Whereas in the House, there are districts. Each district has its own little democracy to do it and try and elect somebody. Let's see. And this is a good way to segue over to when the founding fathers decided to form this government. They looked at all the other forms of government out there and said none of them work. We, contrary to popular belief, were not founded as a democracy. We were founded as a constitutional republic. And the idea dates back to lots and lots of philosophers with big names like Plato, which were two core concepts about democracy. One was the idea that the people could not possibly be educated enough to address every single topic. Take that for an insult or not, that's what they said. The second one, which is much more real, is called the tyranny of the majority. If we lived in a pure democracy, most of the civil rights and freedoms that we have would not exist because they would never have been the majority. The idea of a minority being able to have a foothold, have a voice, not be silenced by the majority, and be allowed to cultivate and gather more power until somebody goes, maybe slavery wasn't the greatest idea in the world. We should change that. And that can only happen in a constitutional republic like we have. Even a full republic has a problem because the massive corruption that always goes with it. Not to say that we don't, but we're trying, There is a corollary. In a pure republic, people are voted as representatives, but they're not really voted by people. It's mostly done by families, oligarchs, pick your bad people, there they are. So we've kind of hit a mid-ground, which is, why I'm a big fan of the system. It breaks, it bends, it cracks, but we have lots of safeguards to try and fix it. Let's see. One of the interesting things, and it's just a little tidbit, is due to the 12th Amendment, most people think that we vote based on a majority of the people, and we don't. We vote based on a plurality of the people, which is to say who got the most votes, not who got the most people. And it's a subtle difference. If three people run and each one gets 33% and one gets 34%, the 34% wins. They are not a majority, they are a plurality. And it becomes important when you have multiple parties in a system, which we're supposed to have. Obviously the reality is that we've pretty much come down to a two-party system, so we don't notice it. But those independents in the middle are what everything in the entire social media and political engine are trying to influence, because that's the win factor these days. The spread has become so thin that, 0.5%, 1% of people can sway an election, so they roll out all the heavy artillery. Let's see. I'm going to jump around a little here because originally this class was set for 2 hours and then I had to condense it, so if I'm a little disjumbled, that's why. Laws. There is no law that says that you can do something, with very rare exceptions. Laws say what you can't do. The founding fathers came up with the idea that we have God-given, little g, don't put any religion into it, God-given inalienable rights. In other words, we as people are allowed to do anything we want, period. That's it. And then the government will put limitations on what we do so that we can live together in a peaceful manner. Okay? So anything the government hasn't had a comment on, we can do. That is the basic premise of all law in this country. So every time someone says there ought to be a law, I cringe a little bit because that is removing a right of the people. Now, it may be something that you agree with, and maybe something you would disagree with, but fundamentally you are removing someone's right to do something. And that needs to be thought through very carefully. And there are plenty of examples of knee-jerk laws being put into place that someone didn't understand the ramifications of it. And you get into some very emotional subjects. I'll go into one, and it's a touchy one, but I'll dare. I don't remember the date. Somebody can look it up if they want, but there was a car accident where a drunk driver killed a pregnant woman. And everybody was mad. And the DA was looking to run for office, so he decided, well, instead of prosecuting for one murder, for vehicle homicide, we'll prosecute for 2. Sounds like a good idea. Sounds great. We're all mad. We're going to do something. The problem is it set the legal precedent that the fetus inside of her was a person. And that carries an enormous amount of legal weight because a person has rights in this country. which leads into the conversation of the Constitution and several other documents make a differentiation between person and citizen. They are not the same. A person has rights. A person, if they're in the country, if they have 1 foot on the ground, is protected by the entire might and muscle of the government, the Constitution, everything. At least they're supposed to be. That's a whole other conversation. But that is the law. The law is that we, the people do this, the people do that, the people are allowed. You shall not stop the people from doing things. Citizens have a very narrow set of added bonuses. You know, they're on the gold plan. A citizen, by definition, is a member of a political group. Wide definition, but there it is. They have the ability to vote, to affect change. They have the ability to hold office. They can serve in a jury, go figure. But they also can have a passport. And the having of a passport entitles you to support from the government outside the country. If a person who is not a citizen is outside the country, they do not get the protections of our government, whereas a citizen outside does. And that loophole is being beat to death right now in some cases. And that's, again, a much more complicated subject for a different time that I wish I could have an hour on it by itself. But, you know, the loophole of trying to move someone out before they're said bad by saying, no, see, they're no longer a person now because they're outside the country is, yeah, okay. Yeah. And the other one is family integration. A citizen can recommend family members be citizens and help through the process. I'm going to jump a little bit here. If you ever read an amendment in the Constitution that's worth reading, it's the 14th. I know everybody loves the first and second, we all know it. And honestly, they're one-liners that everybody interprets all to hell and everything, but read the 14th. It's a little convoluted, but you'll see why. The 14th is the amendment that guarantees that anyone born here is automatically a citizen. Anyone who is naturalized here is a citizen and has all the rights thereof. They have, you know, again, we're getting into another problem here. I apologize for jumping around, but we are not a nation of a single federal government. We are a nation of states that have state governments that answer to a federal government. And when they were all putting this together, the states didn't like each other much, but they decided they had to get together for things like common defense, some economic issues, things like that. So as a result, the states have a separate little microcosm of the federal government. And 9 out of 10, they're pretty much a carbon copy on a small. There is a state Congress, there is a state House and Senate, there is a governor instead of a president. You know, all the basic pieces are there. There's a state Supreme Court as opposed to the federal. And part of what the 14th and several other amendments say is that anything not commented on by the federal government is the virtue of the states, which again, you get into classic things like Supreme Court issues. In the 70s, abortion and the right to it as a medical procedure was on the ballot all over the states in the country. In my opinion, it would have started passing very quickly. For trivia, Ronald Reagan was the first or second governor to legalize it in their state. Trivia of evil Republicans and all that. We'll get to that. What the parties become. The idea was that states would allow it. They would implicitly put a law in place that says you cannot stop a woman from having an abortion. Because you can't write a law that says you can. You can write a law with somebody can't. And like the Constitution is full of, you can't make a law that impedes free speech. You can't make a law that impedes this or that or the other thing. And the states were getting there. And an organization pushed the thing all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came up with the now famous Roe v. Wade, which was, in my opinion, not the greatest of decisions in that it was put together very loosely. It was the best they could do at the time, and I applaud the effort. But instead of kicking it back to the states, the federal government came up with this. We have this framework, and we're going to say that it's a matter of privacy, it's a medical procedure, and therefore everything's good. And that stood for a lot of years. I'm very sad that in my lifetime it stopped, but that's a whole other issue. The reason that it fell apart was that if the states had each had their own that said you can't do this, that would be the end of it. There is no recourse except nailing out that law with another law, which is complex. Because the Supreme Court, contrary to belief, does not make law at all. All it can do is interpret law and claim a law can't be enacted because it's unconstitutional. And what was happening was there was a, don't quote me, I believe it was Texas, where the actual case of Jane Roe, pseudonym of the person, was involved, and Wade was a district attorney that was trying to get them under a Texas law. And they were pushing it to the Supreme Court to say this law is not constitutional, therefore you throw it out, which is effectively what they did. But it didn't say you have the right to do this. It just said the Supreme Court's going to knock out anything that goes near this because they've done it in the past. There is a concept what's called stare Dionysus. No, there will not be a quiz because I can't spell it either. Which is that the court will do what it's always done. It will look at its past and it will go forward. And up until about a year or so ago, that was absolute sacrosanct. The current Supreme Court has been monkeying with it a little bit. And again, that's an entire separate conversation for current events. But in a system that's supposed to work, the Supreme Court should not have gone against its old decision. Now, to show the flip side to this, it has done this before. And for things people probably would more agree with, like Dred Scott. Dred Scott was a decision, I don't remember the year, have fun looking it up, long time ago, thank God, where the Supreme Court basically said that black people weren't people. They weren't citizens. And then they conceded that, okay, they're people, but they're never going to be citizens. And all the legal requirements in it, because they didn't want them voting. And the Supreme Court said that, and they wrote it down, and everybody cheered, and yeah, it's a long time ago. And then, several years later, court came back and went, yeah, no, we need to fix this. And they did. So the idea of always doing what in the past is not perfect either, but there's flip sides to everything. So we do the best we can. The whole basis of our government is checks and balances. And we're going to veer into opinion here pretty hard, but the president and the executive branch are going a little crazy right now. That's an understatement. Congress should have been checking them. Congress has the power to take away their money, has the power to make, laws that can outright, to overrun them and change what he's doing and things. The judiciary is supposed to be stopping them from doing things that are unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the judiciary is kind of rubber stamping things a little more than they should. But the idea behind the judiciary is that they were supposed to be non-political because it's a lifetime and they don't have to get voted. It didn't work this time. Congress, on the other hand, I think is more in fault, again, opinion, in that they could have stopped this stuff a long time ago and really rallied a lot of support. Which is why, to put my little PSA in here, we are coming up on a midterm election, which is a fancy way of saying the election between the presidential elections that happen every 4 years. The entirety of the House and half the Senate are up for re-election. That literally means that every single person in the House of Representatives is up for re-election. They could, in a perfect world, be all voted out or voted in based on the merits of what they're doing. So if there was ever a time where you needed to get out and vote, this is the one that matters, to most, in my opinion. Right now, the lines between the two are literally to the point where if 10 seats in the House got flipped from one party to the other, we would see a radical shift in our government and what it's doing. And we're talking about 10 representatives out of
535.
Thank you. Wow, my brain just seized on that. A very small number. We're talking about average populations for a representative being about, big cities, maybe 50, 60,000, small, maybe 1,000 people. You're talking about get a couple of small counties and 10,000 people together, and you can change the federal government. And that's the power of a minority in our system, but we have to organize and we have to do it. And there's the big bad word gerrymandering, which I am sad to say people now know. There was a long time where nobody knew what that was, and that was a good thing. For those who don't, or at least don't understand it, the idea is simple, is that we can play some funky math games in drawing the lines of these districts and make sure that one candidate wins or that a minimum number lose. You know, the idea, if there are 5 districts that have even, red and blue, if you take all the blue people and you put it in one district and you make the other 4 all red by drawing squiggly little lines and pretty diagrams, then, okay, you lose 1 seat, but you got 4 instead of 5 that are in question. And again, opinion, fight this for everything it's worth. If it ever comes up on a ballot, say no. If it ever comes up, it's never a good decision. Never let anybody sell you on it, because they've tried. Because again, if you're on the side that's getting a little bit of an edge, there's a tendency to want to put your thumb on the scale. Reality is it's not good for everybody. Maybe good for you today, but tomorrow it's going to bite you, like everything in the system. And I veered off a little bit there, and I apologize. Something I'm passionate about. How are we doing? Okay. I don't know how many people are on the Zoom side, but I did want to encourage that, please ask questions, details, specific examples if you have.
In the chat.
In the chat. We have 5 people or 5 questions?
5 people.
Okay.
Apart from the host in this one.
Okay. So if anybody has a question, please. Give me something to slack off on. Okay. I'm picking selected subjects that I feel are under challenge these days, is the best way to describe it. One of which is the concept of protected classes, which was over time, and my laptop has decided to go haywire. There we go. Over time, we have decided that under the 14th Amendment, that everybody should have equal protection, and that protection should not be based on certain things. And the list has expanded over the years. Right now it stands at race, color, religion or creed, national origin or ancestry, sex, including gender, orientation, and identity, pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions, age, physical and mental disability, veteran status, genetic information, and citizenship. These are the official categories right now, which means that everything else aside, you can't make a decision based on those criteria when you're doing something. How enforceable is this? It varies. In things like housing, there are very strict rules, and there's people that should help you, and if you ever have a problem, find them. They love to help you. But like everything else, there is a silent discrimination, best word is any, that comes out with it. But again, this is part of knowing that you do have the right to stand up and say that because I fit one of these criterias, you can't go against me for that. Jobs and pregnancy, the myriad of sex-related ones, etc. Let's see. Is an interesting one in the 9th Amendment. I'll read it because it's a one-liner. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Wonderful convoluted speech, but effectively, in general opinion, it's just because the Constitution says one thing doesn't mean that you can infer something else from it. It means what it says, which is a very good headway into, I call myself a conservative. The definition of a conservative is varied and has been brutally abused, but the original idea is that I believe in the letter of the law as it is written. I believe in the process that changes the law. I believe in a small government that stays out of our hair as much as possible, and does the best for the good of the people doing the least amount of work. Is the best way to describe it. Whereas conversely, the definition of a liberal is to look at more of the intent of the law, which is to say what they think the original founders meant when they wrote it, or taking it in current times and things like that. Personal opinion, I find bias to get into that I don't like, and it's very short-sighted. So I'm a firm believer of, if the law is broke, fix the law. Which is why, like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I don't do this for a living. It's more decades than I care to count of living in this system. And to live in a system and to even think about fighting or changing it, you have to understand how it works. So I look at things very carefully of, okay, that's going to affect me and my family. That's going to affect the people I care about in the world. That's going to affect people I think about. Maybe it's just other people, but understand what's going on and try not to get sucked into the social media vortex of what they'd like you to look at. And we're not sure yet, but there may be a whole second class on that. Just, the magic trick that most of the government and all the media are doing of, look over here, while we do something. And, trying to piece down what is, I hate to use the word real, because even that word gets messed up these days, but there it is. I've gone through the idea of the states override federal if the federal doesn't say anything. And the interesting qualifications, just as examples that are worth researching, things like murder. Murder is not a federal crime. It's a state crime. States designated, because each state has a different little teeny definition to murder, because murder and homicide are different. Intent matters. Our law is based on the concept of intent. If I trip, fall, knock something over and somebody dies, that's not murder. That's, some degree of unintentional homicide. Each state has a different qualification. If I have an emotional event and I lose it and do something, that's not, first degree murder of intending to do it. That's second degree murder. Other states have different names for it, yada, yada, yada. Your mileage may vary. But a lot of the laws that we take as baseline didn't come from federal, specifically because the federal government didn't want to get involved in it. Trivia for history, Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican who believed in the concept of that, we are United States, that there is a single entity of the United States, but that the states were sacrosanct in their own rights. And, this is, fighting a bloody war about that in many respects. It's, again, an entire separate conversation for lots of other people to go into. Let's see. There is an interesting clause in the 14th Amendment that's immunities, which is that one state cannot pass a law that restricts the rights of a citizen. It's worded that way. Let me get the exact here. Yeah. You can't create or enforce a law that restricts the rights of any U.S. citizen, which is to say that a state can't go against your federal rights as a citizen. It's an interesting loophole of things where the state can't go too far in limiting your rights. In other words, a state can't decide that they're going to go against your freedom of speech or, guns or anything else without the Supreme Court getting involved. There's actually an amendment that says, no, you know what, we're going to say this again. And they actually reiterated it, that a state can't take away the privileges of a U.S. citizen. Now, the interesting side effect of that is that we are also citizens of the states we reside in. That's why state of residency is still somewhat important in the background of things. We are held by the laws of the state that we are a citizen of, and another state is not allowed to override our state's laws about us. And that gets very convoluted very, very quickly, but you can see where a lot of people are playing in the margins, especially on some of your more, I hate to use the word popular, but that's the word for it, popular, grievances and topics and fights people have, is they'll start playing games with, well, this state's going to say that, knowing that it's not going to go anywhere because they can't enforce it, but they get the PR run for it. To drive into pure opinion, we're here in Florida. Our governor is a political animal. He is very good at saying one thing and doing things knowing they're not going to get passed or that they're going to get reversed. So he gets the political kudos and didn't actually have to do the bad thing. Or sometimes he did. He's doing whatever people tell him. So on one side, he's kind of the ultimate Democratic Republican. He'll do whatever the majority says. On the other side, he'll go out and, oh, I'm this way. And it's like, yeah, not so much, but that's opinion. Let's see. Yeah. Another law that got put in with the 14th is due process, which basically states have to follow fair legal procedures and respect the rights of individuals before depriving them of life, liberty, and property. Is an interesting loophole that basically says they have to go through due process. It is called the due process, clause. Due process being the totality of existing law and process. This is probably the thing, in my opinion, the most under assault right now in our current government. When somebody can be picked up off the street, I don't care whether they're a citizen or not, they are people. And you can whisk them away to places. There is an argument that says we have a process for that. We have a process that if somebody is suspected of a crime, and I'm not even going to go near the idea of immigration not being a crime, but that's not, but anyway, that the police arrest people. They charge them within a certain period of time. There is a process they must go and rights that the prisoner has. And if they don't charge them, they're freed. And if they do charge them, there's a process and there's a judge to give them bail and a court case and a judge to decide the merits of the case and yada, yada, yada. To whisk them away in black vans in the middle of the night and shove them on a plane to a foreign country and say, well, they're not people anymore because we got them out of the country. I'm sorry, it's the stuff of bad sci-fi, and I'm really sad I live in a time where that happens. But again, opinion. And this is, okay, it's a good example. ICE is a function of the executive branch of the government because the executive branch of the government is tasked with the enforcement of laws, but they don't make them. Congress makes them, and if the executive branch starts enforcing laws that don't exist, Congress and the judiciary are supposed to stop them. Our judiciary isn't, and has taken most of its teeth and ability to, and Congress is got its thumb up an orifice. Opinion. A widely held opinion, but there you go. Congress could have stopped this. They could have done 100 things, and they didn't. And, while at one point I would have called myself a Republican long, long ago when I believed in the party and what it was doing, effectively the second term of Reagan, the church got involved, politics went messy, and that's about the time I said I'm no longer part of this party. I believe in the ideals. I don't like to party anymore, just where I stand. Right now, the two parties are fighting on an imaginary line that has nothing to do with ideals, opinion. Just saying it. They're not fighting on ideals or good or bad for the country. They're fighting on two groups trying to keep their jobs and the mass of the group. Nobody wants to break ranks and be out there in the cold because the other party will kill them. And that's how far the two parties have gotten apart from each other. There was a time when it was not incredibly uncommon for a politician to change parties, literally from one election to the next. To go, that party's not really representing me anymore. I'm going to go to these guys. And, they'd get reelected or not, and things would roll forward. Nowadays, it's a political death sentence, with very rare exceptions. So we're getting back into the chaos of social again. Let's see. We're coming up on about 10, 15 minutes to the end. Are there any questions, or I can blather on the smaller ones?
How can the average person make a difference besides voting?
Oh, God, that is a wonderful question. Oh, I strive my life to answer that. My personal opinion is the most powerful thing you can do is be educated. Um, take the opinion for what it's worth, but there is a website called Ground News that I have turned many people on to. And it is the most, I won't say unbiased, because it actually does say the news, but it tells you where the bias comes from, who owns the paper it was printed in, how historically accurate they are. They are judged by like, I don't know, 6 or 8 independent organizations to judge their truthfulness. And I have found them to be the most reliable source for what happened today, active news. The older something gets, the more there is out there and the more that can be done. So the number one thing a person can do to affect it is understand it. Know where the real issue is. Know where the fights worth fighting are. Down here we have things like, in pure opinion, by the way, we have things like the chalking of the crosswalks here in Florida. A girlfriend of mine got arrested, so there you go. Trivia. It's a wonderful fight. It's a wonderful PR. Unfortunately, it can't do anything. All it can do is show public displeasure with the government, and that has a value. I forget the magic percentage.
3.5%.
3.5%. In the history of recorded everything, if the public at a 3.5 rate is protesting against the government will fall or change. So there is a value to it. But in a day-to-day value, I would think that a much more creative thing to do would be, the rule is not a law. It's a federal DOT requirement. And that's one faction of the laws I want to get into. I'll get back to that. A better thing would be to very publicly and very noisily go to them for an exception. We'd like to, put this down on the sidewalk. And if they come back and say, oh, well, it's a hazard to traffic, which is the first attempt, well, they have to prove it. Because there's a lot of studies that show the opposite, and people looked them up. It's no longer the fight in news, now it's a fight in court. And, as much as our judicial system has been bashed, it's still mostly held up, especially at the lower lines. Judges are still very, very good people trying to do the right thing. And if the question comes up, should we be allowed to paint a crosswalk because we want an exception, and their only opposition is a study that doesn't work, they're probably going to win. And you can get a lot of traction out of the news. Unfortunately, the problem is that we live in a world of 6-second sound bites. So you got to boil it down to it. But to loop back to the original question, A is education. B is using that education to find the part that really matters. Voting obviously is an important one, but before voting, like I said, we're talking about representatives who, 100 people in a room can sway an election. Less than that. We've seen elections swayed by 10, 15 people in a county. Region. Find out where, your group is. Find out how your representative votes. Find out if you like them or not. If there's something that, you don't like about them, reach out, have a conversation, get a bunch of friends. The more people involved, the more they listen, for obvious reasons. And if you want them to change how they vote and do things, lean on them. We're not going to vote for you, because in their district, 100 people voting the other way can make them lose their job or make someone get the job. And if little groups of people this do everywhere, the time when you vote is the end of that whole thing, not the beginning, is what I'm trying to say. Is get involved early. And it doesn't take a lot. I'm not saying you have to go out on the street and protest night and day and da-da-da-da. I'm talking about an email to your local rep, a group of 10 friends that are willing. Maybe one goes to the office, which is locally in your town somewhere, and go, hey, what do you think about these issues? How are you going to vote on them? And if they don't answer the way you like, go, I'm sorry, me and my friends aren't going to vote for you. And, I've got X number of, friends. And you'd be amazed how powerful that is. Obviously, you get into things like senators, it's a lot harder. It takes a lot more friends, but, friends are friends. Which again is the loop back. Voting is the end of that trip, not the beginning. Yes, voting is good and you should vote the way it is, but by the time the vote comes around, most people's minds have been made up. And like I said, they're fighting for that sliver of undecided in the middle. Whereas if you go 6 months, a year earlier, make that sliver bigger. Maybe not necessarily change the mind, just throw the question in your mind of, it's not assumed. Bob isn't just the best guy because he's Bob. Here are these answers he had. Do you agree with them? Well, no, I don't. Well, that's Bob. Do you really want Bob? And things like that. You can send, and I've done it before, come up with 10 questions that can only be answered yes or no. No essays, no detail, no shoveling. 10 yes, no questions. Do you support this? Do you support that? Da, 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 da. Word it as unbiasedly as you can. Get you and about, as many friends as you can get, 20 or 30 is great. Sign it all together and mail it to your local rep. You'll be amazed the response you get. Sometimes a personal phone call, but you'll have the ear of somebody, and that has a lot more to do things, which also means the derivative. When you see organizations and people trying to do that, support them. And mainly the biggest issue goes back, and I can't repeat it enough, is education, which also means filtering out the noise. Don't pick the topic that has everybody running around with their hair on fire, because 9 out of 10 times that's not the real topic. That's the one they want you running around on. I know it's the big ugly they, and we all have conspiracy theories, but the reality is that they is social media, big tech, and the government do have agendas, and they do want you thinking on certain fights. And the best way for them to win is to have you fight a fight you can't win and not talk about the fight you can. So find the fight you can. So I hope that answers the question as best I can, but that's a hour conversation in its own right with lots of details, and I have it often. Any other questions? About 8 minutes?
Oh, we got 5 minutes left.
5 minutes?
If you want to wrap up, I have a few.
Okay. Any last ones or? Okay, good. See if somebody surprises me one.
Here we go.
Okay.
Oh, we got another question?
I have a comment here. So many I know are apathetic and don't vote because they feel their vote is powerless.
It is a common belief, and again, it goes back to what I was saying before: is that when you're showing up to vote at the end of the equation, and there's two big meat-hungry machines that are chewing up the truth and everything around it, it is a very hopeless feeling. And again, it's getting involved earlier. And yes, the vote is the end result, but it's writing a letter. And I don't even mean pen and paper. These days, you go to your favorite political site and they'll have a button that says send a letter to your congressman. And it's all filled out and you push the button. And it seems silly, but that number is a count. That is a vote. No, it's not legally binding and federally enforced and all this, but it is a vote to a guy who doesn't want to lose his job. And, God forbid, is even more of a statesman and says, what do the people really want? And that's what they want. Okay. And if you don't feel like you're getting heard, ask. You don't have to make a lot of noise. Like I said, you can call a representative or even a senator's office and say, I'd like 5 minutes with the congressman. 9 out of 10 times they're probably going to know. Occasionally they'll be like, yeah, I've gotten one on the phone, just randomly calling. And as long as you are coherent and articulate in your questions and your issues, and you stay, again, off the rhetoric that everybody is pushing, you can have an intelligent conversation with somebody. And, yes, they're going to blow smoke at you. They're politicians, of course they are. But it's the constant thing. It's like someone talking to you affects your opinion. So I did have one thing to close it on, which was just one of those funny things, kind of like the video in the beginning. Which, by the way, sit down and watch. It's an interesting, when you get all the pieces. And it's a quote. It is the best worded quote I've seen of this from a funny source, but there's a reason you separate the military and the police. One fights the enemies of the state, the other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, then the enemies of the state tend to become the people. And of course, the quote is from Commander Adama from Battlestar Galactica. But it was one of those like, wow, that has articulated that so well that I have to quote it. And I'd love to say, oh, it's somebody foo-foo, but no, some writer came up with it, more power to him. But it is, a harbinger of things to come, if you will, if we don't watch it. So that was my closing line.
Wonderful. Thank you, John.
Okay.
All right, excuse me,
Okay.
I'm gonna close up.
Yep.
All righty, so Ray, if you could put the slides back up.
We have a comment.
I
Says,
saw.
I'm a progressive thinking black woman who sometimes finds myself in the midst of MAGA types. I prefer not to get into arguments with them, but there's one guy that often baits me. I'm currently of the mindset and age to guard my peace.
That is absolutely a valid response.
Definitely.
Because you do not have to respond to people who are trying to bait you. In fact, I don't. You know what? I'm like, my dad, I will give the example of my dad. My dad and I love to politically argue. When Trump got elected the first time, I told my dad, we can't talk politics anymore. He tries to bait me. You know what I say? You win, Dad. You win. And you know what? It ends it. He knows I don't mean it. I know I don't mean it, but it ends the conversation. And it's a way to end it without getting confrontational with him. You know what? You win.
Listen is up on the screen now.
All right. So we are going to close out with, like we do every time, with a little song, a little chant that we do. It's called Loosen, Loosen Baby. So we're going to sing this 3 times. Feel free to join along if you want. And if not, then... oh, we do have another comment before we start.
Yes, it says, I know our voices have power. I've challenged process in voting here in Canada and received a response indicating that reasonable change was made.
That's wonderful. We can learn a lot from Canadians. They got their act together. I mean, they have universal health care. Why can't we? All right. So any other comments before we close up? Okay. Well, we're going to sing the chant 3 times, so follow along. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your muscles and bones. Let go, let go, let go. Let go, let go, let go. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being part of the movement. What you do matters. You have power. What we learned today is how the government works so that we can work the government. We need to in order to get our country back on track. Do not let democracy die. Thank you.